He paid for my drink. Then he slid his room key across the bar and said, "Don't be late." The room key was still warm from his hand when I turned it over and saw the words engraved on the back. "If you're reading this, I have less than 6 months to live." I looked up, but the man who had just bought my drink was already walking away, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowded hotel bar like he owned every inch of it and none of it mattered. My fingers trembled around that key card. He couldn't have been older than 25, maybe 26, with the kind of face that made you forget your own name and a jawline that could have been carved from marble. I should have set the key down. I should have laughed it off. Instead, I read those words again, and something cracked open in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Maybe decades. The kind of feeling that terrifies you because you know the moment it arrives that your entire life is about to split into before and after. My name is Catherine Aldrich. I'm 53 years old, and until that night in November, I had spent the last 4 years convincing myself that my life was perfectly fine. Divorced. One grown daughter who called every other Sunday out of obligation. A career in pharmaceutical sales that paid well enough to afford the kind of loneliness that comes with hotel bars in cities where nobody knows your name. I was in Chicago for a conference, sitting at the bar of the Palmer House Hilton, nursing a gin and tonic I didn't even want, when he appeared on the stool beside me and everything shifted on its axis. He'd ordered my drink before I could protest. Just caught the bartender's eye, pointed at my nearly empty glass and said, "Another one of whatever she's pretending to enjoy." I turned to him, ready to deliver the kind of polished rejection I perfected over years of unwanted attention, and the words evaporated. He was young. Strikingly, almost painfully young. 25 at most, with fair skin that hadn't yet learned what decades of worry could do to a face, an aesthetic build that suggested disciplined athleticism rather than vanity, and eyes the color of a winter sky just before snow, pale blue-gray, sharp enough to cut through every defense I'd ever built. He wasn't smiling. He was studying me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved but wanted to admire anyway. "I don't accept drinks from strangers," I said. "Good policy." His voice was low, unhurried, impossibly mature for someone his age, the kind of voice that made you lean in despite every instinct screaming otherwise. "But you look like a woman who's been following good policies her whole life, and I'm guessing that's exactly why you're sitting here alone." That landed. It landed hard and he knew it. I saw the flicker in those winter eyes, not triumph exactly but recognition. Like he'd seen himself in my reaction despite the nearly 3 decades between us. He slid the room key across the bar with 2 fingers, deliberate and slow, and said, "Room 1412. Don't be late." Then he stood, left a $100 bill on the bar, and walked toward the elevators without looking back. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the bar like it held the answer to every question suddenly screaming through my mind. Who engraves a message on a hotel key card? Was it real? Was it a line, some elaborate, morbid strategy from a young man who targeted older women? And the bigger question, the one that made my stomach drop, if this stranger truly had 6 months to live at 25 years old, why was he spending one of his remaining evenings buying gin and tonics for a woman old enough to be his mother? I should tell you something about myself. I don't do things like this. I am not the woman who follows a stranger to his hotel room, especially not a stranger young enough to make the entire scenario absurd. I'm the woman who color-codes her calendar, who sends thank you cards within 48 hours, who hasn't had a spontaneous moment since 1997 when I drove to the coast on a Tuesday for no reason and my ex-husband made me feel so guilty about it that I never did it again. I am cheerful and determined, and I talk to everyone: the cab driver, the hotel clerk, the woman behind me in line at Starbucks. But here's the truth about open books. People only read the pages you let them see. I went to room 1412. I knocked twice, and when the door opened, he was standing there holding 2 glasses of whiskey, still not smiling. "You're late," he said. "You didn't give me a time." "Exactly." He handed me a glass. "Punctuality is boring. You're already more interesting than I expected." I stepped inside because something in his voice told me this wasn't what it looked like. The room was a suite, expensive but lived in. Books stacked on the desk, real books, dog-eared and spine-cracked. A laptop open to what looked like a manuscript. A pill bottle on the nightstand that I pretended not to notice and he pretended not to see me notice. I'm Catherine, I said. I know. Your lanyard. He gestured at the conference badge still hanging around my neck. Pharmaceutical sales. Very glamorous. You sell drugs to doctors who already know what they want to prescribe. It's theater. He sat in the armchair by the window, moving with the easy grace of youth tempered by something heavier. I'm Grant. Grant Ellison. And you're dying, I said, because I have never been able to leave the uncomfortable thing unsaid. It's my worst quality. Also, arguably my best. He took a long sip of whiskey. Everybody's dying, Catherine. I just have a more specific timeline. If this story is already gripping you, go ahead and hit that like button because trust me, you're going to want to hear what happens next. Grant Ellison was a novelist. At 25, he'd already published 2 novels that had earned him the kind of literary reputation most writers spend decades chasing. Not bestsellers, not airport books, but the kind of fiction that made other writers whisper his name with reverence and resentment in equal measure. He'd been writing since he was 15, published his first novel at 21, and had been living in a cabin in Vermont since 23 because, as he put it, people exhaust me and sentences don't. So why the hotel bar? I asked, settling onto the sofa across from him, acutely aware of the absurdity. A 53-year-old woman in a conference lanyard drinking whiskey with a 25-year-old literary prodigy. Why the mysterious key card? If you're an introvert with a death sentence, why aren't you in Vermont finishing your masterpiece? Something shifted behind his eyes. Because my editor told me I need to write a love story, and I realized I've never been in love. I laughed. I couldn't help it. That's your line. Help me research love before I die? You're 25. You have your entire... I stopped. The word life crumbled in my mouth. Go ahead, he said quietly. Say it. Everyone does that. They start a sentence about the future, and then remember I don't have one. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's honestly the most entertaining part of my diagnosis. Watching people swallow their own words. The sharp wit was back, the armor snapping into place. And it's not a line. It's a confession. And it terrifies me more than the cancer. The diagnosis, I learned over the next hour, was a rare and aggressive brain tumor. Inoperable. Diagnosed 4 months ago. He'd refused most treatment because the side effects would steal his ability to write, which was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. He told me this without self-pity, without dramatics, with the clinical detachment of someone narrating a character's backstory. It was the detachment that broke my heart. Not the tumor. The way he'd already turned himself into a story he was watching from the outside. Why me? I finally asked. That bar was full of people. Younger people. People your own age. He looked at me for a long moment, and something behind the armor flickered. People my age perform confidence. They perform experience. They perform depth. You were the only person in that bar who had actually earned all 3 and wasn't performing any of them. You were just sitting there, being honest with your loneliness. That takes a kind of courage I've never had. Or maybe I'm just too tired to pretend. Same thing, he said. Courage and exhaustion are the same thing. You just reach it earlier when you're dying at 25. We talked until 2 in the morning. Not about cancer, not about death, not about the impossible arithmetic of our ages, but about everything else. About how I'd married at 24, the age he was now when diagnosed, and how I'd spent 22 years building a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a museum from within. About how my daughter Elise had once told me I was the most aggressively pleasant person she'd ever met, and that it was exhausting. About how the divorce had been the most honest thing my ex-husband and I had ever done. Grant listened the way writers listen, completely with his whole body. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. When I finished, he leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. You're not lonely because you're alone, Catherine. You're lonely because you've been performing happiness for so long that you've forgotten what it actually feels like. And you? I said. What are you performing? Indifference. It's easier than admitting I'm terrified. I went back to my own room that night. Nothing happened. And yet everything happened. Something seismic shifted inside me. Some wall I'd spent decades reinforcing gave way like a dam breaking in slow motion. The next morning I found a note slid under my door. Handwritten in sharp, angular script. There's a bookstore on Michigan Avenue that has a first edition of my first novel. I've never seen one in the wild. Come help me find it. I'll buy you coffee that you'll actually enjoy. Lobby 10 a.m. Don't be late. I skipped my 9:30 panel on emerging biologics. I wore my hair down instead of in its professional twist. My white long silky hair that I'd been self-conscious about since it went fully silver at 45. I told myself this was a pleasant diversion. I was lying. He was in the lobby at 9:45, wearing a navy peacoat that made him look even younger. And when he saw me, something shifted in his posture. He straightened almost imperceptibly. Your hair is different, he said. Observant. It's my job. He held the door. Also, it's extraordinary. Like moonlight decided to become a person. You shouldn't hide it. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, which was mortifying at 53 and also wonderful. You're very smooth for an introvert, I said. I'm not smooth. I just say exactly what I think and people mistake honesty for charm. And if I said your peacoat makes you look like a college student playing grown-up, I'd say that's fair, except college students don't usually have tumors named after them. Mine's called Gerald. We're not close. I laughed so hard I nearly walked into a parking meter. He caught my elbow, and the touch sent electricity up my arm in a way that confused and thrilled me. We found the bookstore and spent 2 hours searching for his novel. We didn't find it. It didn't matter. Tell me about your books, I said over coffee at a tiny cafe with steamed windows. They're about people who almost connect but don't. Every single one. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Hands that were strong and young and would be gone too soon. A reviewer once said my writing made her feel beautifully desolate. I was proud of that. Now I think it might have been a warning. A warning about what? About what happens when you spend your whole life observing love instead of participating in it. Even at 25, you can waste enough time to run out. And that's why you need to write a love story. That's why I need to live one. He looked at me across that tiny table. Even if the world won't understand it. Grant, I'm 53. I'm aware. People will think I'm your mother. People think all sorts of things. Most of them are boring. He reached across the table and touched my hand, just his fingertips against my knuckles. You're the least boring thing that's ever happened to me, Catherine. And I'm running out of time for boring. Now here's where I need you to understand something. I'm not naive. I knew sitting in that cafe that this could be manipulation. Dying young genius seeks older companion for final act. The age gap alone was enough to make me question everything. But his hand was trembling against mine. Not from the cold. From the effort of being this vulnerable. And I recognized that trembling because mine was doing the same thing. I go back to Virginia tomorrow, I said. Vermont's not far from Virginia. It's 8 hours. I have 6 months. 8 hours is nothing. If you're dying to know how this unfolds between a 53-year-old woman and a 25-year-old man racing against time, drop a comment below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. I started driving to Vermont every weekend, 8 hours each way. My colleagues thought I'd lost my mind. My daughter thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. But for the first time in my life, I was living inside my days instead of watching them pass. Grant's cabin was exactly as he described. Small wood panel drowning in books, with windows that framed the snow-covered trees like cathedral glass. I'd arrive Friday evenings and he'd have the door unlocked, a fire going, and the worst coffee ever made waiting on the counter. He wrote during the mornings while I read his novels by the fireplace, discovering the architecture of his brilliant, lonely mind. The banter between us became our language. Every conversation was a sparring match wrapped in tenderness. You folded my laundry, he said one Saturday morning, staring at the neat pile on his bed. It was on the floor. The floor isn't a storage system. It is if you're 25. It isn't if you're a human being. Agree to disagree. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. You also alphabetized my spice rack. You had cumin next to cinnamon. That's chaos. That's freedom. He stepped closer. You're trying to organize me, Catherine. Someone has to. Nobody has to. That's what makes it extraordinary that you want to. The words hung between us. He was close enough that I could smell his soap, something clean and simple. Close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes that the tumor was etching deeper each week. You need to eat more, I said softly. You need to stop deflecting with caretaking when you feel something. I feel lots of things. Name one. Terror. His expression softened. He reached up and tucked a strand of my white hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my temple. Same, he whispered. But the good kind. Everything changed the night Vivian arrived. It was February, a Thursday evening. I was at the cabin for a long weekend. We were making dinner together, which meant I was cooking and Grant was providing commentary and stealing ingredients, when headlights swept across the windows. Vivian Ellison was Grant's older sister. His only family. She was 32, tall, severe, elegantly dressed in a way that suggested she viewed the world as a courtroom she was always winning. She was a corporate attorney in Manhattan who had, by Grant's accounting, raised him after their parents' death when he was 17 and she was 24. She'd managed his career, his finances, his life, with the ruthless efficiency of someone who expressed love through control because she didn't know any other way. She had a key. She walked in without knocking. She looked at me, at my hair loose around my shoulders, at the apron I was wearing in her dead mother's kitchen, and her expression could have frozen the Connecticut River. What is this? Vivian said. Dinner, Grant replied from the counter, not looking up from the bread he was failing to slice evenly. Want some? Grant. Who is this woman? Catherine. She's extraordinary. Have some soup. Vivian's eyes moved across me with surgical precision, cataloging every year, every wrinkle, every impossible detail of a 53-year-old woman in her 25-year-old brother's kitchen. How old are you? She asked me directly. Old enough to know when someone's trying to intimidate me, I said, and unimpressed enough not to let it work. Grant looked up from his bread. I could feel his gaze on me, warm and surprised and something else. Proud. Vivian, he said quietly. Sit down. She's old enough to be your mother. And you're old enough to know that's none of your business. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable hours of my life. Vivian interrogated me with the precision of a cross-examination. My job, my divorce, my finances, my intentions. She was convinced I was exploiting her dying brother, angling for his estate, his literary rights, the posthumous value of a young genius's catalog. The rights to your work alone, Vivian said, turning to Grant, are worth millions over time. A romantic backstory only increases that. Do you understand what this looks like? It looks like two people who found each other, Grant said, and his voice had gone cold in a way I hadn't heard before. A deep, quiet cold that was more frightening than shouting. It looks like the only real thing in my life besides my sentences. And if you can't see that, it's because you've spent so long managing my death that you've forgotten I'm still alive. The kitchen went silent. Vivian's jaw tightened. For a moment, I saw past the armor, past the severity, to the 24-year-old girl who'd suddenly become responsible for a teenage brother, and had been gripping that responsibility so tightly for 11 years that she'd forgotten how to let go. I don't want his money, I said softly. I don't want his estate. I want his Tuesday mornings and his terrible coffee and the way he reads his sentences out loud when he thinks I'm not listening. I want whatever time is left, and I will not apologize for that. Vivian stayed for dinner. She didn't apologize. But when she watched Grant reach for my hand across the table, something cracked in her facade that looked like grief wearing the mask of anger. After she left, Grant pulled me close in the hallway. You didn't flinch, he said. I told you. I don't scare easily. No, you don't. He pressed his forehead against mine. That's the thing that saves me. From the tumor? From the loneliness. The tumor's going to win. The loneliness doesn't have to. The months that followed were the most beautiful and devastating of my life. I quit my job in March. I didn't announce it. I just stopped leaving Vermont. My condo in Virginia became an abstraction, my conference lanyards relics of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Grant wrote every morning with fierce urgency, racing the clock of his own body. The love story poured out of him. I read pages every evening, watching two characters who were unmistakably us and also something larger, something universal, unfold on the page. One evening in early April, something shifted between us that had been building since Chicago. Grant had had a bad day. The headaches were getting worse, and he'd spent the afternoon lying in the dark while I sat beside him, reading aloud from his favorite Chekhov stories because the sound of my voice helped when the pain was at its worst. By evening, the headache had receded, and he emerged from the bedroom looking fragile and fierce and beautiful in the way only young men who have stared down their own mortality can look. I was sitting by the fire, still holding the Chekhov. He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, taking the book from my hands and setting it aside. "Catherine." "Yes. I need you to know something." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've never said this to anyone. I've written it 1,000 times for characters who aren't real, but I've never said it with my own mouth to a person who is." "Then say it." "I love you. Not as research. Not as a chapter. Not as a dying man's last experiment. I love you the way the real thing feels, terrifying and irrational and completely beyond my ability to write about, because the real thing is bigger than any sentence I've ever built." I pulled him up to me and kissed him, and this time there was no hesitation. His hands found my waist, then my hair, tangling in the white silk of it, and mine found the back of his neck, the warm skin there, the pulse that beat too fast. He lifted me from the chair with the effortless strength of his youth, and I wrapped around him, and we moved through the cabin in a slow, deliberate dance toward the bedroom. What happened next was not what I expected. I had braced myself for awkwardness, for the self-consciousness of my 53-year-old body beside his 25-year-old one, for the mathematics of age to intrude on the equation of desire. Instead, he laid me down on the bed and looked at me with an expression of such reverent wonder that I felt, for the first time in my life, truly seen. Not the version I performed. Not the cheerful, pleasant, conference-ready Catherine. The real one. The one with the stretch marks and the laugh lines and the heart that had been starving for decades. He traced the lines of my face with his fingertips, slowly, as if memorizing me. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he whispered. "And I have seen sunrises over Vermont mountains. You win." "Flattery," I breathed. "Fact." He kissed my collarbone. "I deal in facts disguised as fiction. You should know that by now." We made love with a tenderness that undid me. He was gentle in the way that only those who understand fragility can be, not because he thought I was fragile, but because he understood that what we were doing was sacred, a bridge built between two people who had spent their entire lives on opposite banks of the same river of loneliness. His body was warm and strong against mine, and mine answered him with a hunger I hadn't known I possessed, years of dormant desire rising to the surface like spring water breaking through winter earth. Afterward we lay tangled together, his head on my chest, my fingers drawing slow patterns on his back. The fire had burned low, casting amber shadows across the ceiling. "That's going in the book," he murmured. "Don't you dare. Not the details. The feeling. The feeling of arriving somewhere you didn't know existed." He lifted his head and looked at me. "I've been writing about near misses my whole career. People who almost touch. This is what happens when they actually do. It's so much bigger than I imagined. Is this the part where I point out that your whole career is 4 years long? Length is irrelevant. Ask anyone with a terminal diagnosis." He grinned, and God, that grin, boyish and sharp and devastatingly alive. "Besides, I've accomplished more in 4 years than most writers do in 40. I'm efficient. You're insufferable. You love me." "I do." I kissed his forehead. "God help me, I do." The weeks after that night were luminous. We fell into a rhythm that felt ancient, as if we'd been doing this for lifetimes instead of months. Mornings were his. He wrote with renewed energy, the love story taking on a dimension it hadn't had before, a physical warmth, a lived-in quality that breathed from every page. Afternoons were ours. We walked the property, tended the garden I'd planted, his roses and mine growing side by side. Evenings we cooked together, argued about literature, and fell into bed with the grateful urgency of people who understood that every night together was borrowed. But Grant was getting worse. The headaches lasted longer. His vision blurred sometimes. He lost words mid-sentence, which for a writer was a particular cruelty that made him rage, and then go quiet in a way that frightened me more than the rage. In May, Vivian returned. Different this time. She brought groceries, good ones, and a bottle of whiskey that Grant pronounced acceptable, which from Vivian is practically a declaration of love. She watched us together, the easy choreography of two people who had merged their lives, and something in her finally surrendered. "I was wrong," she said to me on the porch while Grant napped. "I thought you were taking something from him. You were giving him something I couldn't. I've been managing his life for so long, I forgot that managing isn't the same as living. He loves you, Vivian. You know that." "I know. I just don't know how to love him back without a spreadsheet." She almost smiled. "He seems happy. Actually happy. I didn't think that was possible anymore." "It's possible. Just expensive. It costs you everything you've been hiding behind." She squeezed my hand once hard, and that was enough. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this find the people who need them. Grant finished the book on a Wednesday in July. He typed the last word, closed his laptop, and walked out to where I was kneeling among the roses, dirt on my hands and sun on my hair. "It's done," he said. "How does it feel?" "Like putting down something heavy I've been carrying since I was 15 and first realized that words were safer than people." He knelt beside me in the garden. The dedication says, "For Catherine, who showed up, who stayed, who made the real thing bigger than any sentence I ever wrote." I cried. He held me. The roses witnessed everything. He lived for 3 more months. 3 months of quiet mornings and long afternoons and evenings by the fire where he read to me from everyone else's books because he said, "My own are finished. Let me enjoy theirs." 3 months where I learned that love is not a lightning bolt or a grand gesture but a daily choice. The choice to stay in the room, to hold the hand, to make the coffee, to say I'm here even when here is the hardest place in the world to be. His final weeks were gentle. The pain was managed. Vivian came and stayed in the guest room and learned how to just be present without managing. The 3 of us had dinners together that were quiet and real, and full of the kind of love that doesn't need to announce itself. He died on an October morning with the light coming through the trees exactly the way he'd always described it, like something out of a cathedral. I was holding his hand. His last words were the same as his first to me. "Don't be late." I knew what he meant. Don't be late to your own life. Don't be late to joy. Don't be late to the terrifying, impossible, beautiful thing standing in front of you. The book was published the following spring. It was called Cathedral. It became his first bestseller, which he would have found both gratifying and absurd. 25 years old, 2 previous novels, and a love story written in the final months of his life that cracked the world open. Vivian managed the estate with grace, honoring every instruction, funding the literary foundation that thrived exactly as Grant had envisioned. My daughter Elise called the day the book came out, not out of obligation, out of something real. "Mom," she said, her voice cracking, "I read it. He wrote about you like you were the most extraordinary person who ever lived." "He saw me," I said simply. "That's all. He just saw me. I want to see you too, Mom. I want to really see you." We talked for 4 hours. It was the beginning of something new, something honest, built on the foundation of a woman who had finally stopped performing and started showing up. I still live in the cabin. I still tend the roses, his and mine, growing together now, impossible to tell apart. On my desk sits the room key from the Palmer House Hilton with those engraved words that started everything. Next to it, a copy of Cathedral with the dedication page bookmarked. Sometimes love arrives in packaging the world tells you is wrong. A drink you didn't order. A key from a hand 3 decades younger than yours. A dying boy's confession that he'd never been in love. The world will tell you it doesn't make sense. The math is wrong. The optics are wrong. Everything about it is impossible. But love has never cared about math. Grant taught me that love isn't about having enough time. It's about what you do with the time you're given. Every single one of us is on a timeline. The only question is whether we'll spend it watching from the outside or finally stepping in. He lived 25 years and accomplished more living in his final 6 months than most people manage in 80 years of caution. So if you're sitting at your own bar tonight, nursing a drink you don't want, waiting for permission to feel something real, consider this your room key. The door is open. The fire is lit. Someone extraordinary might be waiting on the other side. Don't be late. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late and never too unlikely to choose love over fear, hit subscribe and join this community. Every like and share helps these stories reach the person sitting alone tonight who needs to hear exactly this. Leave me a comment. What would you do if someone slid a key across the bar and changed your life forever? I want to hear your story, because every single one matters. Every single one is a cathedral.